Number she called me useless. Now she's calling to borrow $50,000. I used to be a mother-in-law. Now I'm just the help. That's what my daughter-in-law Lena made clear every single day after my husband passed away 2 years ago. I moved in with my son Josh and his family, thinking I'd be welcomed into their home. Instead, I became the invisible woman who cleaned their messes and cooked their meals. Every morning, I'd wake up at 6 to prepare breakfast for everyone. Josh would rush out to work without a word. The kids would grab their food and run to school, and Lena would sit at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. She'd glance up occasionally to remind me that I'd forgotten to iron Josh's shirt or that the coffee was too weak. "Marina," she'd say without looking up, "you really need to pay more attention to details. This house runs on precision." The dining room where we ate dinner had become my personal courtroom. Every evening, Lena would find something wrong with the meal I'd spent hours preparing. The chicken was too dry, the vegetables were overcooked, or the seasoning was bland. She'd sigh dramatically and tell the children, "Grandma's cooking isn't what it used to be, is it?" The kids would giggle nervously, and I'd smile and clear the plates, pretending her words didn't cut through me like glass. But the worst part wasn't the constant criticism. It was the way she treated me like I was nothing more than hired help. "Marina, the bathrooms need scrubbing," she'd call from the living room. "Marina, the laundry's piling up again." "Marina, can you watch the kids while I go get my nails done?" Never please, never thank you, never any acknowledgement that I was family. I had become the ghost in my own son's house. The breaking point came during a family dinner last spring. Josh had invited his colleagues over, and I'd spent the entire day preparing a feast. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, homemade bread, and apple pie for dessert. I was proud of that meal, proud to show Josh's friends that their family was well taken care of. But as I served the main course, Lena looked at me with those cold eyes and said, "Marina, you missed a spot on the dining room table. And next time, could you try to make the meat less tough?" I stood there holding the serving platter, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. Josh's colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My grandson Tommy, only 8 years old, looked up at me with confused eyes. That's when Lena delivered the final blow. "Mom really doesn't contribute much besides cooking and cleaning," she said to the guests, as if I wasn't standing right there. "Sometimes, I wonder if having her here is more burden than help." The room fell silent. I set down the platter, excused myself, and went to my small bedroom at the back of the house. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the framed photo of my late husband, David. He would have been furious. He would have stood up for me, defended me, reminded everyone that I had been a respected literature professor for 30 years before I retired to care for him during his illness. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, invisible and unwanted in my own family. I needed to reclaim who I was before I completely disappeared. I just had no idea how dramatically my life was about to change. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in November. I was driving to the grocery store when the rain started falling harder than the weather forecast had predicted. The roads became slick, and as I rounded the curve near Miller's Bridge, my car skidded on the wet pavement. I remember the sensation of losing control, the steering wheel spinning uselessly in my hands, and then the terrifying moment when my car broke through the guardrail and plunged into the rushing river below. The water was shockingly cold. It filled the car faster than I could have imagined, and I struggled to unbuckle my seatbelt as the current carried us downstream. My lungs burned as I held my breath, fighting against the weight of the water pressing against me. The car windows had shattered on impact, and somehow, through sheer survival instinct, I managed to squeeze through the passenger side window just as the vehicle was swallowed by the dark water. I don't remember much about the next few hours. I was told later that I was pulled from the river nearly 2 miles downstream by an elderly couple, Frank and Helen Morrison, who lived in a small cottage near the water. They found me unconscious on the muddy bank, barely breathing, my body battered and broken. Frank carried me to their home, while Helen called for an ambulance. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The authorities found my car 3 days later, completely submerged and mangled beyond recognition. My purse was still inside with my identification, but there was no sign of my body. The search and rescue teams combed the river for a week, but the November floods had made the current too dangerous and unpredictable. After 10 days, they called off the search and declared me dead. Meanwhile, I was lying in a hospital bed 2 towns over, registered as Jane Doe. The impact had given me a severe concussion, and I'd lost my memory for several days. By the time I remembered who I was, I had already seen the local newspaper article about Marina Davidson's tragic death. I saw the photo they'd used, a formal portrait from my teaching days, and I read about the funeral service that had been held without a body. The obituary was brief and impersonal. Marina Davidson, 62, beloved mother and grandmother, died in a car accident on November 15th. She was a retired literature professor who devoted her later years to caring for her family. Services were held at Riverside Chapel. That was it. 43 words to summarize an entire life. I called the hospital's social worker and asked what would happen if I told them my real name. She explained that I'd need to contact my family, provide identification, and go through legal processes to prove I was alive. I would have to return to Josh and Lena's house, resume my role as the unwanted mother-in-law, and continue living as a ghost in my own family. As I sat in that hospital room, looking out at the autumn sky, I made the most radical decision of my life. I chose to stay dead. If my family could bury me with such casual indifference, if they could move on so easily, then maybe Marina Davidson really had died in that river. Maybe it was time for someone new to be born. I took the name May Collins and rented a small apartment in the coastal town of Clearwater, about 3 hours from my old life. With the settlement money from my car insurance, which I claimed under my new identity, I had enough to live modestly while I figured out what came next. I cut my long gray hair into a short, modern style, bought clothes that made me feel vibrant instead of invisible, and began to write. At first, I wrote just for myself. I poured my story onto paper, all the years of feeling worthless and forgotten, all the small humiliations and quiet suffering. I wrote about being a woman who had disappeared long before she ever went missing. I wrote about the death of self-respect and the slow erosion of identity that happens when you live entirely for others. But as the months passed, my writing became more than just therapy. It became a voice for women like me, women who had been made to feel invisible in their own lives. I submitted my essays to magazines under the pen name May Collins, and to my surprise, they were accepted. My first published piece was called The Art of Disappearing While Still Alive, and it resonated with readers in ways I never expected. Within 6 months, I had a literary agent. Within a year, I had a book deal. Letters from the Invisible Woman became a bestseller, though no one knew that May Collins was really a supposedly dead grandmother from a small suburban town. I started a blog where I shared stories from other women who had found themselves erased from their own lives, and it grew into a community of thousands. The irony wasn't lost on me. In death, I had finally found my voice. In disappearing, I had finally become visible. The woman who had been dismissed as useless was now inspiring others to reclaim their own worth. But even as I built this new life, I couldn't completely let go of the old one. I kept track of my family from a distance, reading local newspapers online and occasionally driving past the old house. Josh seemed to be doing well in his job at the consulting firm. The kids were growing up healthy and happy. Lena had taken over the household duties that I used to handle, though I noticed she'd hired a cleaning service within a month of my death. Life had moved on without Marina Davidson, just as I suspected it would. 2 years after the accident, I received a phone call that would change everything. I was in my study, working on my second book, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a voice I knew all too well. May Collins? The voice was shaky, uncertain. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think you might be my mother-in-law. I think you might be Marina Davidson. It was Lena. Somehow, she had tracked me down. My heart pounded as I tried to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, I said, but I think you have the wrong number. Please, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. I know you're alive. I know you're May Collins, the writer. I've been following your work for months, and I recognize your voice, your way of thinking. I need to talk to you. I should have hung up. I should have maintained my new identity and let the dead stay buried. But something in her voice, a desperation I had never heard before, made me pause. What do you want, Lena? We need help, she said. We need you. Josh lost his job 6 months ago, and we're about to lose the house. We've maxed out our credit cards, and the kids' school fees are due next week. We need to borrow $50,000, and I know you can afford it. Your book sales, your speaking engagements, you're successful now. I sat in silence, processing what she was saying. The woman who had called me useless, who had treated me like hired help, was now asking for money. The family that had buried me with barely a second thought was now begging the ghost to save them. Why should I help you? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Because you're family, she said. Because Josh is your son, and those are your grandchildren. Because I know I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Marina. I was cruel and thoughtless, and I took you for granted. But please, don't punish the children for my mistakes. I told her I would think about it and hung up. But I already knew what I was going to do. I was going to see them in person, to look Lena in the eye and let her see who I had become. I was going to reclaim my story on my own terms. I arranged to meet them at a coffee shop in their town the following week. I wore a red dress that made me feel confident and powerful, and I styled my short hair carefully. I arrived early and chose a table where I could see the entrance, watching as Josh and Lena walked in together. They looked older, more tired than I remembered. Josh's hair had started to gray, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Lena looked smaller somehow, less commanding than the woman who used to order me around. When she saw me, she stopped walking and stared. "Mom?" Josh said, his voice barely a whisper. "Is it really you?" I smiled, but it wasn't the submissive smile I used to give when I lived in their house. This was the smile of a woman who had found her power. "Hello, Josh. Hello, Lena. You're looking well." They sat down across from me, and I could see the shock in their eyes. This wasn't the broken, invisible woman who had lived in their back bedroom. This was someone new, someone who took up space and commanded attention. "I can't believe you're alive," Josh said, tears streaming down his face. "We mourned you. We buried an empty coffin. How could you let us think you were dead?" "Because," I said simply, "I was dead. The woman who lived in your house, who cleaned your bathrooms and cooked your meals while being treated like she was worthless, that woman died in the river. I'm May Collins now, and I'm very much alive." Lena reached across the table as if to touch my hand, but I pulled it back. "Marina, please. I know I was terrible to you. I know I made you feel unwelcome in our home. But I was stressed, overwhelmed with the kids and work, and it's no excuse, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." "You called me useless," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You told your guests that I was more burden than help. You made me feel like I was nothing more than hired help in my own son's house." "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I've thought about it every day since the accident. I've wished I could take it back, tell you how much you meant to us, how much you did for our family." Josh leaned forward. "Mom, please come home. We miss you. The kids ask about you all the time. We can start over, be the family we should have been." I studied their faces, seeing the genuine remorse and desperation there. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to go back to being the grandmother who baked cookies and helped with homework. But I had worked too hard to build my new life to give it up for the promise of better treatment. "I appreciate your apology," I said. "And I'm glad you've realized that I had value beyond cooking and cleaning. But I'm not coming back. I'm not Marina Davidson anymore." "Then help us as May Collins," Lena said. "Lend us the money. We'll pay you back, I promise. We'll pay interest. Whatever you want. Just please don't let us lose our home." I looked at these people who had once been my family, who had dismissed me and forgotten me and buried me without a second thought. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing my own dreams to support them, the decades of being taken for granted. "I could give you $50,000, I said. "My book sales and speaking fees have been very good to me. I could write you a check right now and solve your problems." Hope flickered in their eyes. Lena gripped Josh's hand tightly. "But I won't," I continued. "Because who's going to give me back the 50 years I spent being invisible? Who's going to compensate me for all the times I was dismissed, ignored, and treated like I didn't matter?" Mom, please, Josh said. We're family. Family, I repeated. Family doesn't call each other useless. Family doesn't treat each other like servants. Family doesn't bury each other and move on without a second thought. I stood up from the table, gathering my purse and coat. I wish you well, both of you. I hope you find a way to solve your problems. But I'm not your solution anymore. I'm not anyone's solution, but my own. As I walked toward the door, I heard Lena call my name. Marina, wait, please. I turned back one last time. My name is May Collins. Marina Davidson died 2 years ago, and frankly, it was a mercy. She deserved so much better than what you gave her. I left them sitting at that table and walked out into the sunshine. I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had finally shed the last remnants of my old life. I drove home to my apartment by the sea, where I had work to do and a life to live. The months that followed were the most productive of my career. I finished my second book, The Woman Who Came Back from the Dead, which became an even bigger success than my first. I started giving speeches at conferences about women's empowerment and reinvention. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see but never had the courage to visit. My blog, Letters from May, became a sanctuary for women who felt invisible in their own lives. I shared my story openly, without revealing specific details about my family, and the response was overwhelming. Women wrote to me from all over the world, sharing their own experiences of being dismissed, forgotten, and taken for granted. One letter particularly touched me. It was from a woman named Sarah who wrote, "Reading your story gave me the courage to leave my marriage. I realized I had been disappearing for years, becoming smaller and smaller until I was nothing but a shadow. Your words reminded me that I deserved to take up space in this world. That's when I knew that my suffering hadn't been in vain. By sharing my story, I was helping other women find their voices and reclaim their power. I was turning my pain into purpose, my invisibility into impact. I eventually moved to a small house overlooking the ocean, where I could write and think and breathe. I painted the walls bright colors, filled the rooms with books and art, and created a space that reflected who I was becoming rather than who I had been. I planted a garden full of flowers that bloomed in every season, a reminder that it's never too late to grow something beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, I would wonder about Josh and the grandchildren I had left behind. I hoped they were well, that they had found a way through their financial difficulties. I hoped that my absence had taught them something about taking people for granted, but I didn't regret my decision to stay away. I had given them enough of my life. The rest belonged to me. One evening, about a year after our meeting at the coffee shop, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Josh, and his words were careful and respectful in a way they had never been before. "Dear May," he wrote, "I know you don't want to be called Mom anymore, and I respect that. I want you to know that we survived our financial crisis. I found a new job, and we managed to keep the house. More importantly, losing you taught me and Lena some hard lessons about how we treat the people we love. I'm raising my children differently now, teaching them to value and respect their elders. I hope someday you might want to meet them again, but I understand if you don't. I just wanted you to know that your sacrifice wasn't forgotten, and your absence was felt every single day." I kept that letter in my desk drawer, not because I was planning to respond, but because it represented something important. It was proof that my disappearance had mattered, that my value had only become clear in my absence. It was validation that I had been right to choose myself over their comfort. On my 65th birthday, I threw myself a party. I invited the friends I had made in my new life, the other writers and artists and free spirits who had become my chosen family. We ate cake and drank wine and celebrated not just my birthday, but my rebirth. I stood in my garden, surrounded by people who saw me and valued me, and I felt more alive than I had in decades. I didn't need revenge against the people who had dismissed me. I didn't need them to suffer for the way they had treated me. I simply needed to be free of them, to live my life on my own terms. I had learned that the best revenge is a life well lived, and I was living mine beautifully. As I looked out at the ocean that night, watching the waves crash against the shore, I thought about the woman who had driven off that bridge 2 years ago. She had been drowning long before her car hit the water, suffocating under the weight of other people's expectations and dismissal. But from her death, something new had been born. May Collins was everything Marina Davidson had been afraid to be: bold, independent, unapologetic, and utterly, completely alive. I raised my glass to the sunset and made a toast to the woman I had become. I didn't need anyone's permission to exist, anyone's approval to matter, anyone's gratitude to justify my worth. I had learned the most important lesson of my life: that it's never too late to save yourself, even if everyone else has given up on you. But my story wasn't quite finished yet. 3 months after my birthday party, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, tending to my roses, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. When I looked up, I saw a young woman walking toward me, and my heart nearly stopped. It was Emma, my granddaughter, now 17 years old and looking so much like I had at her age. "Grandma May?" she said tentatively. "I hope it's okay that I'm here. I found your address online, and I had to see you." I set down my gardening tools and really looked at her. She had grown into a beautiful young woman, with David's eyes and my stubborn chin. But there was something else in her expression, something that reminded me of myself at her age, when I felt lost and searching for my place in the world. "Emma," I said softly, "you're so tall now. Come, sit with me on the porch." We settled into the wicker chairs I had bought for watching sunsets, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I could see her gathering courage, the way I had done so many times in my own life when I needed to say something important. "I remember you," she said finally. "I remember how you used to braid my hair and tell me stories about princesses who saved themselves. I remember how you'd sneak me extra cookies when Mom wasn't looking. And I remember that awful dinner when Mom said those terrible things about you." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You were so young. I didn't think you understood what was happening." "I understood more than anyone realized," she said. "I saw how they treated you, how they made you invisible. Even as a kid, I knew it was wrong. When they told us you died in the accident, I cried for weeks. Not just because I missed you, but because I felt like we had failed you somehow." Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a worn copy of my first book. "I bought this when it came out, before I knew May Collins was really you. Something about the writing felt familiar, like I was hearing a voice I knew. When I read about the invisible woman, I thought about you. Then I saw your author photo, and I knew." I took the book from her hands, seeing the highlighted passages and margin notes. She had read it carefully, thoughtfully, the way I had taught her to read when she was little. "I'm applying to colleges now," she continued. "I want to study literature, like you did. I want to write stories that matter, that help people feel less alone. Mom thinks it's impractical, that I should study business or something more useful. But I keep thinking about what you taught me when I was little, about how words have power." "Your mother said I was useless," I reminded her gently. "She might have a point about practicality." Emma's eyes flashed with anger. "Mom was wrong about a lot of things. She's different now, since you left. She's been going to therapy, trying to understand why she treated you the way she did. She talks about you sometimes, about how much she regrets what happened." I studied my granddaughter's face, seeing the earnestness there. "And what do you think about all of this?" "I think you did what you had to do," she said without hesitation. "I think you saved yourself, and that took incredible courage. But I also think maybe there's room in your new life for some of the people who love you. Not the people who took you for granted, but the people who saw your worth even when others didn't." We spent the afternoon talking, really talking, in a way we had never been able to when I lived in their house. Emma told me about school, about her friends, about the boy she was dating who wrote poetry. I told her about my writing, about the women I had met through my work, about the life I had built by the sea. As the sun began to set, Emma asked the question I had been dreading. "Would you ever consider seeing Dad and Tommy?" "Not Mom, not yet, but maybe just them. Tommy's 13 now, and he asks about you all the time. He says he dreams about you sometimes." I thought about my grandson, who had been only 8 when I disappeared. He would be a teenager now, probably taller than me, with questions about life and family and where he came from. I thought about Josh, my son, who had inherited his father's kind heart but had somehow lost his way when it came to standing up for what was right. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not the same person I was when I lived in that house. I can't go back to being the grandmother who stays quiet and keeps the peace. If I'm going to have relationships with any of you, it has to be on equal terms. Emma nodded. That's all I'm asking. Not for you to come back, but maybe for you to leave the door open, just a crack. After she left, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. For 2 years, I had lived as if my old life was completely behind me, as if Marina Davidson had truly died in that river. But Emma's visit had stirred something in me, a recognition that perhaps I didn't have to choose between my old identity and my new one. Perhaps I could find a way to honor both. I began writing again that night, not for publication this time, but for myself. I wrote about the complexity of family, about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, about the courage it takes to love someone who has hurt you while still protecting your own heart. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking more and more about Emma's words. I started paying attention to the local news from my old town, not obsessively, but with the gentle curiosity of someone who had once belonged there. I learned that Josh had indeed found a new job, that he was coaching Tommy's baseball team, that he had spoken at a local conference about the importance of family communication. I also learned that Lena had become involved in a support group for family members dealing with difficult relationships. She had written a piece for the local newspaper about the importance of treating elderly family members with dignity and respect. It was a small gesture, but it suggested that she was genuinely trying to change. One evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I picked up my phone and called Josh. Hello? His voice was cautious, probably because he didn't recognize the number. Josh, it's me. It's May. There was a long pause. Mom? May? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. I saw Emma a few weeks ago. She's grown into a remarkable young woman. She told me she visited you, he said. I hope that was okay. I didn't know she was planning to do that. It was more than okay. It was exactly what I needed. I took a deep breath. I was wondering if you and Tommy might like to come visit me sometime. Not to move back in. Not to pretend things are the way they used to be. But just to spend some time together. I could hear the emotion in his voice when he answered. I would love that. We both would. Tommy talks about you all the time. About the fishing trips you used to take him on. About how you taught him to make pancakes. I'd like to take him fishing again, I said. There's a pier near my house where the sunset turns the water gold. I think he'd like it. We made plans for the following weekend. Josh would drive Tommy down to my house, and we would spend the day together. No pressure, no expectations, just 3 people who shared a history trying to figure out how to be family in a new way. The morning they arrived, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't expected. I had dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt like me but not so different that they would be jarring. I had prepared Tommy's favorite snacks and borrowed fishing gear from my neighbor. When Tommy got out of the car, I was struck by how much he had grown. He was almost as tall as his father now, with the same dark hair and serious eyes, but when he saw me, his face lit up with the same smile he had worn as a little boy. Grandma May, he said, running toward me. I can't believe you're really here. I can't believe you're really alive. I hugged him tightly, feeling the solid warmth of his teenage body, smelling the familiar scent of his hair. I'm here, I said. I'm really here. Josh hung back, giving us space to reconnect, but I could see the tears in his eyes. When Tommy finally let go of me, I walked over to my son and gave him a hug too. It was awkward at first, formal, but gradually it became something more genuine. You look good, Mom, he said. Happy. Different, but happy. I am happy, I said. Happier than I've been in years. We spent the day doing simple things. We fished off the pier, with Tommy catching 3 small bass that we threw back. We walked along the beach, collecting shells and sea glass. We ate lunch at a little cafe where the owner recognized me and asked about my next book. I could see Josh processing this, seeing me as May Collins the author rather than just Marina Davidson the mother. That evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Tommy asked me the question I had been dreading. Why did you let us think you were dead? Why didn't you come back? I looked at this young man who had been a child when I disappeared, who deserved an honest answer. Because I was drowning long before that car went into the river, I said. I was disappearing a little bit every day, becoming smaller and smaller until I was barely there at all. The accident gave me a chance to save myself, to become whole again. But we missed you, he said. We needed you. I know, I said. And that's something I'll always have to live with. But I also know that if I had stayed, if I had kept being invisible, I would have disappeared completely. And then I wouldn't have been any good to anyone, including myself. Josh spoke up then. I failed you, Mom. I should have stood up for you, should have made Lena treat you with respect. I was so focused on keeping the peace that I let you become the casualty. You were trying to hold your family together, I said. I understand that. But I couldn't keep being the glue that held everything together while falling apart myself. We talked until the stars came out, really talked, about hurt and forgiveness and the complicated ways families love each other. It wasn't a magical healing, but it was a beginning. We were 3 people who cared about each other, figuring out how to do better. As they prepared to leave, Tommy asked if he could come visit again. Maybe next time I could bring some of my friends? I'd like them to meet my grandmother, the famous author. I smiled. I'd like that very much. After they left, I sat on my porch for a while longer, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the peace of withdrawal or resignation, but the peace of integration. I was May Collins, successful author and independent woman. I was also Marina Davidson, mother and grandmother, albeit on my own terms now. I thought about the woman who had driven off that bridge 3 years ago, the woman who had been so beaten down by life that she had forgotten her own worth. That woman had needed to die so that someone new could be born. But perhaps death and rebirth didn't have to be permanent separations. Perhaps they could be transformations that made room for a fuller, more complete life. 6 months later, I published my 3rd book, The Art of Selective Forgiveness. It was about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, about how to love people who have hurt you while still protecting your own heart. It was about the courage it takes to set boundaries and the wisdom to know when they can be adjusted. The book became my biggest success yet, resonating with readers who had struggled with similar family dynamics. I received thousands of letters from people who had felt invisible in their own lives, who had found the courage to advocate for themselves after reading my story. But the letter that meant the most to me came from Emma, written on her college acceptance letter. She had been admitted to her first-choice school with a scholarship for creative writing. "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to rewrite your story," she wrote. "I'm going to write mine with the same courage you showed when you wrote yours." I keep that letter on my desk now, next to the photo of David and a new picture of Tommy holding his first big fish. They remind me that we are all constantly writing our stories, making choices about who we want to be and how we want to be remembered. I chose to save myself when no one else would. I chose to value my own life when others had dismissed it. I chose to build something new from the ashes of what was broken. These weren't easy choices, and they came with costs that I'm still learning to live with. But they were my choices, made from a place of strength rather than weakness, of self-respect rather than self-pity. And in making them, I discovered something profound. It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be, even if everyone else has given up on you. The waves keep coming, endless and eternal. And I stand here knowing that I, like them, will keep moving forward. I have found my voice, claimed my space, and chosen my own story. I have learned to love selectively, to forgive strategically, and to live authentically. And for the first time in my life, that is more than enough. It is everything.